Your mind is at war with itself right now. Not with the world, not with anyone else, with the thoughts that keep showing up uninvited. The critical voice that replays what you said last Tuesday. The worry that circles back before you've even finished breakfast. The moment you catch yourself spiraling and think, I have to stop this. And so you try. You push the thought away. You tell yourself, not now. You distract, you breathe, you redirect, and it comes back. Maybe stronger this time, maybe wearing a different face, but it's back. And somewhere under all of that effort, there's a question you haven't said out loud yet. What if fighting these thoughts is making it worse? And you're not alone in that. Buddhism has sat with this exact pattern for a very long time. And what it found might change how you see your own mind. And that's what this is about. And you felt this, that moment when you catch a thought and grip it, trying to force it out. And the harder you push, the louder it gets. The Buddha noticed this too. He described the untrained mind as muddy water. The more you stir it trying to clear it, the murkier it becomes. That image alone carries more weight than most self-help advice ever does. Because here's what's actually happening when you try to fight a thought. The moment a negative thought appears, the mind does something automatic. It labels the thought as a problem. And the moment something becomes a problem, the mind mobilizes to solve it. It focuses attention on it. It runs scenarios. It rehearses arguments. It builds a case for why this thought means something important. All of that activity is the mind, doing exactly what minds are built to do. But it doesn't work on thoughts, the way it works on practical problems. If your car won't start, thinking harder about it makes sense. You diagnose, you act, you fix. But a thought isn't a car. A thought is more like a sound in a room. You can't think your way out of a sound. You can only change your relationship to it. And that is the shift Buddhism is asking you to make. Not a technique, not a strategy. A different understanding of what thoughts actually are and what your job is when one shows up. If this is landing for you, there's more of this on the channel. Subscribe so you don't miss it. In Pali, the ancient language of early Buddhist teachings, there's a word, papancha. It's usually translated as mental proliferation. The way the mind takes one thought and spins it outward into a whole world. One worry becomes a story. One memory becomes an identity. One moment of self-doubt becomes evidence of everything you've ever done wrong. That's papancha, the mind's natural tendency to multiply. And the teaching on papancha isn't to suppress it. It isn't to demand that the mind stop doing what minds do. The teaching is to recognize it, to see it happening while it's happening. Because recognition is fundamentally different from resistance. When you resist a thought, you are in a relationship with it. You're pushing back against it, and pushing back requires contact. Think about it this way. If someone says, don't think about a red apple, what happens? You think about a red apple immediately, without even trying. The instruction itself creates the thought. Resistance creates contact. Contact keeps the thought alive. You've been here before. You know this feeling. You've tried to stop a thought by deciding to stop, and it didn't work. Not because you're weak, not because your mind is broken, but because the strategy itself was working against the way minds actually function. The more energy you give to a thought by trying to fight it, the more real and urgent it becomes. You're essentially telling your nervous system, this thing right here, this is a threat worth attending to. And your nervous system listens. So the struggle intensifies. The thought grows. And somewhere along the way, you start to believe that the thought itself is the problem. But the thought isn't the problem. The relationship you have with the thought, that's what changes everything. Think about how it actually goes. A thought arrives. Maybe it's about something you should have said differently. Maybe it's about something you're afraid is going to happen. Maybe it's a version of you that you don't like, showing up uninvited. And what happens next? You react to it. You judge it. You try to figure out if it's true. You argue back against it. You try to replace it with something more optimistic. All of that is engagement. All of that engagement teaches the mind that this thought matters enough to respond to, which is an invitation for the thought to stay. This is the part most people skip over because it doesn't feel like you're the one inviting the thought to linger. It feels like it's happening to you, but the mind is learning from every response you give it. Every time you stop what you're doing to argue with a worry, the mind files that away. Worries get responded to, and so it generates more of them. Not because the mind is broken, because it's doing its job. It's helping you pay attention to the things you care about. The problem is, caring and suffering have gotten tangled up. And Buddhism is trying to show you a way to care without being consumed. Here's what that actually means. Most people treat their mental experience as a performance review. A thought shows up, and before it's even fully formed, you're already evaluating it. Is this a good thought or a bad thought? Does this mean something about who I am? Should I be having this? That evaluation is the first layer of suffering, not the thought, the judgment about the thought. And then there's a second layer, the judgment about the judgment. I shouldn't be thinking this. Why can't I just let this go? What's wrong with me that I keep coming back to this? And suddenly you're not dealing with one thought. You're dealing with a whole architecture of reaction, built on top of a single moment. Buddhism calls this the second arrow. The first arrow is the difficult thought. It arrives. It hurts a little. That's unavoidable. The second arrow is everything you do next. The self-blame, the attempt to suppress, the frustration at the frustration. The Buddha pointed out that most human suffering isn't from the first arrow. It's from the second. It's from the way you respond to what's already happened. And here's the thing. You can't always stop the first arrow. Difficult thoughts will arrive. That's just what minds do. But being aware of the second arrow that's within reach. Each time you notice yourself adding to the suffering, arguing with the thought, condemning yourself for having it, you have the option to pause, to say there's the second arrow, and to set it down. Not perfectly, not instantly, but gradually, with practice, more often. The Buddhist alternative to fighting isn't suppression. It isn't distraction. It isn't replacing bad thoughts with good ones. It's observation. There's a practice in early Buddhist meditation called vipassana. The word means clear seeing, not seeing through a lens of judgment or agenda, not seeing with the goal of changing what you see, just seeing what is as it actually is. Mindfulness, in the way Buddhism uses the word, is essentially this: not a relaxation technique, not a performance of calm, but the practice of noticing what's actually happening right now without adding layers of story to it. When you bring that kind of looking to a negative thought, something quiet happens. Instead of becoming the thought, you become the one watching the thought. That might sound like a small shift in language, but it's a massive shift in lived experience. When you are the thought, it's the whole reality. There's nothing else. The thought fills the room. When you are the one watching the thought, it's something passing through your field of awareness, and you are larger than what's passing through. The thought didn't change. What changed is where you're standing. The Buddha said it plainly. Your worst enemy cannot harm you as much as your own thoughts, unguarded. But once mastered, no one can help you as much. Notice what he's pointing to. The problem isn't the thought. The problem is the unguarded relationship with the thought. And the solution isn't elimination. It's mastery, not control. Mastery. There's a difference. Control means forcing something into a shape it doesn't want to hold. Mastery means understanding something well enough that it stops running you. And something is shifting in how you understand this. Because most approaches to difficult thoughts put you in the role of fighter. They ask you to engage. Challenge the thought. Replace it with a better one. Breathe through it. Distract yourself until it fades. All of those strategies require you to do something. And doing something keeps you in contact, which keeps the loop going. Buddhism asks something quieter. It asks you to stop trying to fix the weather. Your thoughts are weather. Some days there are clouds. Some days there are storms. Some days the sky is so clear it almost hurts to look at. The sky doesn't fight the clouds. It doesn't try to push them out of bounds. It doesn't shame itself for not being clearer. The sky just keeps being the sky. That's not a pretty metaphor. That's actually a precise description of what you are in relation to your thoughts. You are not the weather moving through. You are the space that holds it. In Buddhist terms, this is the difference between content and awareness. Content is everything that appears in the mind. Thoughts, feelings, memories, sensations, all of it is content. Awareness is the silent background in which content appears. Content changes constantly. Awareness doesn't. Thoughts rise and fall. Emotions rise and fall. The one who is aware of all that rising and falling, that one remains. And this is worth staying with for a moment, because you were never really taught to make that distinction. You were taught to manage thoughts, to have better ones, to think more positively, to reframe the negative into something useful. All of that assumes that the solution is in the content. Better content, better life. That Buddhism is pointing somewhere else. It's saying the solution isn't in changing the weather. It's in realizing you're the sky. And once you realize that, something fundamental changes. Not in the thoughts, in you. Because when you know you are the awareness holding the thoughts, and not the thoughts themselves, you stop being at the mercy of whatever happens to show up. The critical voice shows up. You notice it. You don't become it. The worry arrives early. You notice it. You don't follow it all the way down. The shame surfaces. You notice it. You let it move through instead of making it a residence. That's the shift. Not dramatic, not instant, but real. And when a difficult thought shows up, the practice isn't to battle it or banish it. The practice is to notice it, to say, quietly and without drama, there's that thought again, not with contempt, not with forced acceptance, just with recognition, like seeing an old face on a crowded street. You don't have to invite them in. You don't have to run. You just notice. And here's what nobody tells you about this. That act of simple noticing, that quiet act of recognition, breaks the cycle. When you don't notice, the thought just runs, like a background process on a device you forgot to close, draining energy you didn't know was being spent. You walk around exhausted, not necessarily from what happened, from the constant, invisible effort of being caught inside thoughts you're not even fully aware you're fighting. The arguments you're having with people who aren't in the room, the scenarios you're rehearsing for things that haven't happened yet, the replays of conversations that ended months ago. All of that is running somewhere in the background, using bandwidth, wearing you down. But the moment you notice a thought, genuinely notice it without immediately trying to fix or flee it, you've created a gap, a small one, maybe just a breath wide. And in that gap, something like choice becomes possible. Not the choice to eliminate the thought. The thought is still there, but the choice of what to do next. That's a different kind of freedom than most people are chasing. Most people want the thoughts to stop, but stopping thoughts isn't the goal. Having a different relationship with thoughts, that is. This is where the teaching gets practical. The Buddha described the mind as a garden. Things grow there without being planted. They push through the soil uninvited. And the gardener's job isn't to rage at what grows. It isn't to pretend certain plants don't exist. It isn't to tear up the whole garden in frustration every time something unwanted appears. The gardener sees clearly. tends carefully, makes decisions about where to put energy and where to simply let things be. That's the difference between a reactive mind and a practiced one. Not the absence of difficult thoughts, the presence of a steadier awareness beneath them. And this is where so many people misunderstand what Buddhism is actually saying. They hear observe your thoughts and they think it means passivity, like you're just supposed to sit there while your mind runs wild, nodding pleasantly at every storm that rolls in. That's not it. Observation isn't the same as doing nothing. Observation is active. It takes real effort to stay present with a difficult thought, without immediately flinching away from it or diving headfirst into it. It takes real practice to notice the thought without becoming it, and it takes patience, because the mind has had years of practice doing the opposite. Years of chasing thoughts, fighting thoughts, hiding from thoughts. That pattern doesn't dissolve overnight. Consider what a lifetime of thought fighting actually looks like. You wake up and a worry arrives with the morning light. You immediately try to solve it, or push it down, or talk yourself out of it. But now your mind knows. When a difficult thing shows up, your mind mobilizes. And so the next time a thought arrives, the mobilization is faster, more automatic. The fighting becomes a habit, and eventually you don't even know you're fighting anymore. It just feels like anxiety. It just feels like being a person with a busy, heavy mind. Buddhism is saying that's not who you are. That's a pattern you learned. And patterns can be unlearned, not by forcing something new over the top of something old, but through repetition of a different response. Every time you catch yourself mid-spiral and say, oh, this is happening, that's the practice. Not perfectly executed, not beautifully calm, just aware. That moment of awareness, even just a flicker of it, is doing something. It's building what Buddhism calls the observer mind, the part of you that can stand slightly back from experience, the part that can watch a thought arise without immediately being pulled into the thought's orbit. And this is something worth understanding clearly. The observer mind doesn't emerge from effort. It emerges from recognition. You already have it. It's already in you. Every time you've ever caught yourself thinking something, noticed you were in a spiral, paused and wondered, why am I feeling this way? That was the observer mind. It was already functioning. What practice does is make it more consistent, more available, so that it's there not just in calm moments, but in the middle of the hardest ones. And this is how the practice actually grows. Not in meditation retreats, not in perfectly quiet rooms, in ordinary moments. The thought that arrives while you're washing dishes, the worry that surfaces during a commute, the old memory that shows up uninvited while you're trying to rest. Each of those is a chance, not to fight, not to fix anything, just to notice, even if the noticing comes late, even if you're already halfway down the spiral before you realize what's happening. The moment of noticing still counts. You can be 3 minutes into an anxious thought loop, catch yourself, and gently come back. That's not failure. That's the practice. The practice is the coming back, over and over, as many times as it takes. And once that capacity deepens, the relationship with difficult thoughts begins to change in ways you didn't expect. Not because the thoughts are different, because you are. Over time, you'll find that the thoughts don't disappear. The critical voice still shows up. The worry still arrives before breakfast. The old shame still surfaces sometimes, but it doesn't own the whole room anymore. You're present too, and you're bigger than any single thought that passes through. There's space now, space you didn't know was there before. Space between the thought and the reaction. Space where something quieter than anxiety can live. And that space, small as it might be at first, is the beginning of something. Not a fixed state, not a permanent peace you achieve and keep forever, but a growing capacity to be with your mind without being run by it. You are not what you think. You are the one who thinks. And that distinction is everything. The Buddha offered this: peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. That peace isn't the silence that comes when thoughts stop. It's the stability that exists beneath them. The ground that doesn't shift just because the weather does. It was always there. You just couldn't feel it through all the fighting. Because fighting kept you focused on the surface, on the clouds, on what was moving. And the ground beneath, steady and unchanged, stayed just out of reach. But it's there. It's been there the whole time. Under every anxious thought, under every spiral, under every night when you couldn't make your mind slow down. The awareness that holds all of it. That is you. Not the thoughts, not the worry, not the version of yourself you argue with at midnight. The one watching all of that. That is you. And here's what's worth sitting with after this. You've been trying so hard to think correctly, to feel the right things, to not be affected by the things that affect you. That effort came from somewhere real. It came from wanting to be okay, from being tired of not feeling okay, from caring about how you show up in your own life. That's not weakness. That's not failure. That's a mind that cares about itself. But caring about something doesn't have to mean battling it. You can care for a mind the way a gardener cares for soil, with patience, with attention, without demanding it be different than it is today. Buddhism calls this metta, or loving kindness, often translated as compassion toward oneself, not indulgence, not letting yourself off the hook, but meeting your own experience with the same warmth you'd offer someone you love. The thoughts you'd never say to a friend, you've said to yourself 100 times. Compassion doesn't mean those thoughts disappear. It means you stop treating them as verdicts. The next time a thought shows up that you don't want, see if you can do something different. Don't push it away. Don't dive in after it. Just notice. There's that's what's here right now. And then let the next moment come. Not because you've won. Not because you've figured out how to finally fix your mind. But because you've stopped needing to. You don't have to be stronger than your thoughts. You don't have to perform peace. You don't have to have it all together before you're allowed to be okay. You just have to notice and let that be enough. That's where this starts. One moment of clear seeing, then another, and over time something settles. Not because the thoughts are gone, because you stopped fighting the weather, and the sky underneath, which was always there, finally has room to be felt. This channel exists to help you see what's actually happening inside your mind. If that's what you're looking for, subscribe. There's more here, and it's waiting for you.